An alleged serial killer has been arrested in Winnipeg, Canada. He is accused of the murders of 4 First Nations women. Hey everybody, welcome to the True Crime Squad. I'm Kristi Brower, here with my sister, co-host, and partner in crime, Katie Weaver. Hey Katie.
Hello.
How's it going?
Oh, well, it's going well.
Well, yes it is.
It's really snowy and beautiful outside,
It
and
is, yeah.
my little magpie friend that I feed in the winter has been
Oh,
coming around just about every morning to get her breakfast, and what can I say? That's pretty magical.
mm-hmm. That
Yeah,
is super magical. There's just something about birds in the winter, I think.
true.
We get
True.
doves and we get magpies and blackbirds and, you know,
Mhm.
little tiny super fat sparrows in our backyard. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, they're so cute. I love birds in the winter.
They're so special. Yeah. Well, and I wasn't sure if this little magpie is the same one every year. After
Mm-hmm.
I Googled it, and I think, it couldn't be because they don't live that long.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, what's
I've
the
had this magpie
lifespan?
coming back for 4 or 5 years,
Oh,
so couldn't be the same one, but just maybe a learned behavior. But,
mhm.
she posed for me this week so I could get a cute little picture of her.
Aw.
But every day the routine's the same. I go out to take the dogs out to potty, and she's out there in the pine trees yelling at me, and I put a handful of dog food on the grill, up on the barbecue grill so she can get to it,
Mhm.
and then, she waits for us to go in the house, and as soon as we go in, then she swoops in there and starts getting her food.
That's so
She's
cool.
so sweet. Now, occasionally she's not there, and I always
Mhm.
put her food out anyway. And usually by midday it's gone, and occasionally it's never gone that day. And then the next day I don't put any out, and then it's gone. So, I mean,
Probably
it's
off
like,
yelling at somebody else. She probably is getting fed in her own house.
I don't know. People around here hate magpies.
You know
They
they do, and
shoot them, they
I
poison
don't
them.
understand it. They're beautiful birds.
Well, partly they hate them because they kill the little birds, like the doves.
That's true. They
We
do.
saw a pretty horrifying, magpie dove murder in our front yard one year. But, but it is
But
nature, it's what they do.
it is what they do, and magpies are so smart,
Mhm. Oh,
and I just
man.
think they're beautiful. Those blue,
Mhm.
black, iridescent black feathers with the white, they're just stunning.
Well, and my beloved crows that I feed all summer, they're only here in the summer, you
Yeah,
know? But my magpies are here year round, so,
that is cool.
anyway, I'm just really enjoying the magpies, seeing them out in the trees and feeding them, and just yep, what
That's
can I
cool.
say? I'm a bird brain, I guess.
Well, I mean, I didn't wanna say anything, but okay.
Right?
Um, well, this is our Monday episode, and we're gonna kick it
Mhm.
off. Katie, you have a little bit of true crime news for us.
Yes. So there is potentially a serial killer in Tijuana.
Oh, no.
And so there's not a lot known, but I wanted to kick off an investigation on this so that we can continue
Sure.
to track it. Uh, there have been 3 murders in Tijuana. The prosecuting attorney there is calling it Bundy like.
Oh,
They're comparing
no.
the kind of murders. They're calling it a Ted Bundy copycat.
Oh, God. Gross.
So it's 3 Tijuana sex workers that have been snuffed out. They're
Okay.
being targeted in strip clubs, taken back to a hotel room, and then having violent sexual acts performed on them before being murdered.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Well, that's horrifying.
Well, and so far in their investigation, they are quite sure it is an American that's crossing the border
Of course.
and coming down to
White guy.
Tijuana. Hmm. Yep. But here's what the attorney there, or the prosecutor there said. This subject has criminal tendencies associated with violent and psychopathic behavior. His profile is very similar to someone who became very well known decades ago. Ted Bundy.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's terrifying.
So they're watching this closely. They're trying to, really warn all of the women in Tijuana to have their guard up. Don't go anywhere with someone you don't know. Do not go to a hotel room, with someone you
Yeah.
don't know. And that's hard because there are
Mm,
a lot of sex workers in Tijuana that,
right.
this is how they feed their families, is how they stay alive. And so, uh, yeah, it's horrifying, but it's something that we definitely want to keep an eye on
Hmm.
and hope that now that they kind of have a pattern here that they're seeing, that they can get this guy caught before anybody else loses their life.
God, fingers crossed. I'm always glad at least that there can be some information to go out to the group that is vulnerable to this
Yes.
person so that they can start keeping an eye out and protecting themselves in a way that they
Yeah.
may not normally
Hmm.
do.
Yeah, for sure. So keep an eye on that one. And we will too.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. Well, with that, I'm going to kick the mic over to you for our main case.
Yes. Well, I guess it's just serial killer news today because we do have
Yes.
an alleged serial killer. We talked about this briefly last week when it was just breaking. We wanted to go into it a little more in depth this week. This is coming out of Winnipeg, Canada.
Yeah.
That there is an alleged serial killer who has been arrested now and charged with the deaths of 4 Indigenous women.
Yes.
Now, you all know that we have been very intentionally covering missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls cases for almost two
Yeah.
years now. We live in Idaho, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas are terrifying
Yeah.
for um, the number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and
Oh,
Canada
the worst.
has a very similar problem. And
Yeah.
we just want to lift information up. We want to give
Yeah.
this a boost so that more people are aware. So that if this is going on in your community, you can be holding your authorities accountable and your news accountable because
Absolutely.
so many of these cases go completely unreported,
Oh,
uninvestigated.
cases
Called
that we uncover and can't even freaking believe what has gone on here that the
mm,
news has never said a single word about. It's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. So this situation is definitely getting more attention. I think that is a lot, credit due to family members.
Mhm.
But let me tell you a little bit about what we're talking about here. So Jeremy Skibicki, this is Jeremy. Let me show you a picture. Jeremy Skibicki has been arrested and was originally charged with the murder of one woman
Mhm.
after her remains, some of her remains at least, were found in the trash behind his where he lived. Um, things have really spread now
Mhm.
to he's now charged with 4 murders. We have
Mhm.
the names of 3 and a fourth who has been given a name by the indigenous elders.
Okay.
So we have Rebecca Contoy, who's 24. She is who he was originally charged for. Her partial remains were actually found in a dumpster behind his apartment or house. I'm not sure what it is. But then we have Morgan Harris, who was 39. She was the mother of 5, and her 2 of her
Oh.
daughters, her youngest child is 4.
Oh,
Her children,
no.
unfortunately, have been in the foster care system. She has had a very challenging life. She grew up in the foster care system, and if you know anything about Indigenous children growing up in the foster care system, whether it's Canada or the United States, they have a very high incidence of being in foster care. 55% of children in foster care in Canada are Indigenous, even though only 8% of the population of Canada is Indigenous.
Oh,
Anyway,
no.
so she's had some problems with some drug use. Morgan Harris has, and her children have been growing up in foster care. Her 2
Mhm.
oldest daughters have been speaking out. They've actually even met with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of
Uh-huh.
Canada, trying to get something better for their
Uh-huh.
mother. And then we also have Mercedes Myron, who's 26.
Okay.
And then the fourth woman, now what we know is that they have been identified by DNA.
Mhm.
The Harris woman, her daughter actually gave blood to be used, and that's how they determined that her mother is one of his victims. So they
Yeah.
don't have these victims' bodies except for Contoy.
Mhm.
The other three bodies are in landfills.
Mhm.
And that's where this gets very challenging for what's happening for the families.
Mhm.
So the fourth woman is being called Buffalo Woman, and that's a very, very sacred honorific to be given to anyone
Yeah.
by Indigenous elders. So they wanted to give her a name that honors her life.
Yeah.
They do believe that this fourth victim was also Indigenous, so and they know for sure that the first three were.
Uh-huh. Oh.
Um,
Is this just the beginning?
well, that is a question. I don't know. They're not really saying if there's potentially any more, but I mean, we do know for sure with DNA evidence that there are.
Yeah.
Jeremy Skibicki does have an attorney and does intend to plead not guilty on all counts.
Mhm.
He has court coming up in January, and so we'll be keeping a close eye on that and how this case is being handled because
Mhm.
clearly they have quite a lot of forensic evidence in this case.
Okay.
Even though they don't have bodies, they've got what they need to
Mhm.
prove that these women were in fact murdered.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Oh, drinking a fizzy lemonade, and it's fighting with me right now.
It's wreaking havoc. Okay.
We don't know a lot about Jeremy Skibicki except that he has had charges for domestic abuse in two relationships in the last 7 years.
Oh.
And his one ex-partner said that she was afraid that if he wasn't stopped, that he would not stop until he killed her.
Oh man.
So that goes clear back to 2015. He has spent some time in jail. He's been on probation. There
Mhm.
have been protection orders against him for these two women who have very much feared for their
Their
lives
lives.
from
Yeah.
him. In 2015, um, he was on probation from a conviction for assaulting his partner at the time,
Okay.
and he was required to stay away from her and not make contact for 2 years.
Wow.
But unfortunately, she did file a protection order against him, and that was dismissed. There's some questions here about how has he been handled in the past. You know,
Right.
has this been handled appropriately? Was this someone that should have been a bigger red flag?
Mhm. Sounds
Which
like
this very
maybe,
much could
yeah.
be. Yeah.
Oh man.
So there is a bit of a timeline that we know. I mean, there's a lot that they know at this point. Um, so I'll tell you a little bit about the each victim and when they went missing. So Myron, she last had contact with her family in March of 2022.
Okay.
Police believe that she was killed on or around the 15th of March of 2022.
Oh.
Harris, police believe, was killed around May 1st. She had been living homeless and having some problems with drugs. And so it's not totally clear because she wasn't in regular contact with her family.
Uh-huh.
Let's see. And then Contoy, who is this is the original victim that they did in fact find her partial remains,
Mhm.
that she was killed on the 14th or 15th of May. This is all this year, 2022.
Right. Okay.
Um, her partial remains were found on the 16th of May,
Okay.
2022. They also believe that the remains of Harris and Myron were transported that day to the Prairie Green landfill, like in dumpsters.
Mhm. So how many more victims has he thrown in dumpsters that we just don't
Right.
know
We
about?
don't know. There's certainly a question of, is this all of them?
Right.
So Skibicki was actually arrested on May 18th, in connection with the death of Contoy.
Mhm.
So since then, they did this huge search, and they are saying that they have not ruled out the possibility of more victims.
Mhm.
And on May 19th, he was charged with first degree murder for the murder of Contoy. And then in June, the police started searching a landfill called Brady Road landfill for the rest of Contoy's remains.
Okay.
Now, this is where things get a little sketchy because they knew clear back in May that Harris and Myron's remains were probably in this landfill, the Green Prairie landfill. Sorry, it gets confusing because there's two different landfills.
Mhm.
But they back clear in May, they were pretty sure they knew where their bodies were, but they weren't searching at that time. They also had not told their family members. Their family members only learned that they had confirmed that through DNA that this was their family members,
Mhm.
just last week.
Oh, wow.
So here's the thing that's going on now. They have stopped the search at the Green Prairie landfill because they say it is too big of a job, that it's not going to be possible to find them. There have been, since they knew in May they were probably in that landfill, there have been about 10,000 loads dumped in that landfill.
But they must have found something. They have DNA.
Right, right, they do. And I don't know how they know that that's where their remains are. They
And
didn't,
the fourth victim, is that where she is as well?
they're not saying, they haven't said specifically yet on
So
that one because
Conte is the victim that got him busted, but she's actually the last.
Contoy, yes, yeah, she's the last one. They believe that
Okay.
he had already killed these other three. But the thing that's going on now is that Harris's children, her daughters, are speaking up for her. Like, how can
Right.
you say that you won't search for her? You
Right.
know he killed her. You know where her body is, and now they're
Mhm.
saying that it's just not feasible. And we
Oh,
know from the Simon case recently what a huge deal it is to search a landfill for bodies. It is. It's huge. But how can you do that? How can authorities do that to these families?
is it possible that he had souvenirs?
Well, I think so. He must have had something because they have been able to
How
test.
do they know?
Right.
Yeah.
We don't know, but he must have had something.
Right. But yeah, how do you do that for to families?
You tell these young women,
Yeah.
they're just
We
barely out
know
of
that
their
your murdered
teens.
mother is here, but it's too big of a deal for us to find
Yeah,
her.
sorry.
Which we know. I mean, looking at the Quentin Simon
Oh
murder
yeah,
here in the US here this last month, I mean, it
right.
took like what, 6 weeks or no, I think 3 weeks actually. 3 weeks of something like 2,000 people searching a landfill to come up with the remains of an 18-month-old.
Yeah,
But it's worth that for these lives. I mean, yes, it is a big job.
yeah. It is.
Undoubtedly, it is a big job, but come on.
Apparently, they use some kind of compaction system, and they say that the loads that they believe those bodies are in have been compacted and are now buried under these huge other loads.
Oh
Okay,
boy.
I get that, I do. But you cannot disrespect this person and
Right.
her children this way by they've been trying for a while. They haven't found them. And so now they're just saying, well, it's just we just can't do it. And uh Harris's children are just not having it. They have been all
Yeah.
the way to Justin Trudeau, but that just happened last week. So
Right.
there's a
Uh,
pause on the search for those bodies now,
mhm.
while they figure out what to do. But I am suspecting that there
Mhm.
is a lot of pressure now
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely.
on Canadian authorities. I just don't think that it's right to tell these girls that they are going to stop looking for their mom.
Right. That.
These kids have been through a massive amount of trauma already,
And now
and now
this.
their mother's murdered by a serial killer, and the authorities aren't going to find her body. Like,
Mm,
it's rough. It's
that's
really rough.
really rough. Yes.
And, you add in the part, the piece of this that's so key is that we're talking about Indigenous women.
Right.
And there is an epidemic, a a crisis
Yes.
um, of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada and the
Yeah.
United States. And I know other countries are having their issues as well, but we're pretty familiar with it because we live near a reservation. We are aware of some of those cases,
Right. Of course.
because we have made ourselves intentionally aware of them,
Hmm.
not because our news, reports them at all. I've reached out to our news, tried to
Hmm.
encourage that and help, got
Nothing.
nowhere.
Yep.
Um, and they're just feeling like we're just always invisible, and here we are
Yeah.
invisible again, and it's wrong.
Everyone's beloved East Idaho News, Nate Eaton, you guys all
Yeah.
love so much for all of his coverage of the Daybell Vallow case.
Mhm.
Well, Nate's not doing anything for the Indigenous community.
Not a thing. And I reached out
Anything.
to him. I reached out to another reporter that works with him. I offered what information I knew. I offered what I know about the MMIW crisis that's happening in the US and in
Hmm.
Canada, and how important it is that the news stay on these cases.
Hmm.
Nothing, guys.
Yeah.
Nothing.
It
And
needs
it's
to get
really
better.
frustrating. And it's hard because one of the reasons, we cover these cases as often as we can, but sometimes there's so little information.
Yeah.
There's practically nothing to even tell you.
Hmm.
This case, because it's hitting the news, because it's now, they're calling this a serial killer. There's four
Yeah.
victims. The news in Canada, it has hit the U.S. news a little bit, but it's mostly news in Canada
Yeah.
covering this. And of course, we want to keep the pressure on because these families deserve the same. They deserve the same care
Level of
and the
care.
same
Yeah.
attention as Gabby Petito. And we all
Yes.
know the Gabby Petito case, and we all know how hard authorities looked and they for her and did find her, and all a cross country search, and
And
everything
that
that
the
happened
entire
there.
country was compelled by that case. Yeah.
Yes,
Because
but
the media was all over it.
right, there's so much attention, and attention gets action from law enforcement.
Yeah.
We know that. We've seen it over and over again, and that's where things really fail in the MMIW cases.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. For
I'm
sure.
heartbroken for these girls and for all of the families that have lost their loved ones. And
Yeah.
I don't care if her kids were in foster care. I don't care if she was a drug addict and living on the street. She
Oh.
was a person. They were all human beings
Hmm.
who have the same value as any other human being
Yeah.
and have the right to be looked for, to be memorialized, and to get justice. Everyone has that right.
Absolutely.
So this is a case we're going to keep a very close eye on, as we
Yeah.
always do.
So
And
back to
we'll,
it for just a second. I
yeah,
have I have more I have more questions and thoughts.
right.
I've had a lot
So
of
many.
coffee this morning, so here we are. Okay. Obviously, I mean, not obviously, but that's my thought, right? Is that he must have had souvenirs.
Right.
He
He had
had
to
to
have
have had
had
souvenirs. But
some kind of
also,
biological
Contoy,
something.
they found partial remains of Contoy.
Oh, they found the rest of her in the Braiding landfill. They found the rest of her body
Right.
in the Braiding landfill. So they did
But
find her.
right, but that makes me think that he was decapitating, partially destroying corpses, putting parts of them in different dumpsters maybe. I'm
Right.
curious to know how they knew that some of these went to the Green Prairie landfill, if
It's
that had to
Prairie Green.
do
I keep saying it backwards
Prairie Green.
because Prairie Green doesn't make sense to me. I want
Right,
it to
my
be Green Prairie.
brain. Yeah. But because of that was based so my question was, is that based on where he lived at the time, on what dumpsters he put these in? Like I'm just so,
They're
or
not
did
saying. And
something change with the
initially
way
it
their
came out that
garbage service Yeah.
Right, but they clearly know. They're very specific about that they know. They're not saying why they know or how they know,
Mhm.
but they knew that Contoy was in the Brady landfill. They
Mhm.
initially thought that the other 2, at least 2, 'cause
Yeah.
see, then there's the unnamed victim, and we don't know. They're not really saying
Right.
anything about her, but,
Mhm.
for a while, it was assumed that all the remains were gonna be found in the Brady landfill. Well, then it turns
Mhm.
out that we find out that they know actually
Mhm.
that these other 2 women are in Prairie Green,
Mhm.
but we don't know why they know that.
Right.
There's a lot
Uh,
we don't know. And he
yes.
will be in court in January. Maybe we'll learn more then. I don't know. You
Maybe.
know, criminal justice system is gonna hold a lot of stuff back because that's
Mhm.
their evidence. That's what they're gonna
Mhm.
use to convict him.
Well, and this is such a tight cluster
Yeah, it is.
of killings that
Mhm.
it's hard for me to think that that was really it, except for that if they have that evidence still, I'm still stuck on souvenirs, that he had to have had souvenirs, in
Right.
which case they know of, but then again, maybe they know of these 4, but they're still doing DNA on others. I don't know. My
Yeah.
wheels are turning.
I know.
Interesting
Me
and
too,
and
very much.
terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's clearly a lot that they know and that they're
Mhm.
gonna hang on to because this forensic evidence is what will make this case against this
Certainly.
guy.
Certainly.
But we may
Well,
learn more as he works his way through the Canadian court system, and maybe we
yeah,
won't too. I don't know, but we'll keep an eye on it and
for
share it.
sure.
But
And all the
you know,
love to the families.
absolutely, so much love to these families, and especially those Harris girls. They just
Mhm.
the if the videos of the older daughter just making a plea, like, how
Mhm.
can you not see my mother as a human being
Yeah.
who deserves to be found?
Yeah.
So yeah, we will continue to update, but please keep an eye. Do some searches in
Yeah.
your community. If you live in Canada or in the US, do some searches in your community. Are there missing and murdered Indigenous women in your area? I'll bet you there are.
Yeah.
And
Are
I'll
they
bet
being
you
talked
you've
about?
never heard of them. Yeah.
We had a case in our area that we had never even heard of a woman who was dismembered in a cow pasture
Yeah.
that
Her
whose
name
death
is
was,
Rebecca Plentywounds.
yes, and Rebecca Plentywood's death was ruled as not even as a homicide.
It's never even been ruled a homicide so that it could be
Yep.
investigated.
Never even ruled a homicide because, surely she just did that to herself, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm.
this was in 2016.
Well, and
And
her
Rebecca
grandmother
Plentywounds is still, there's been nothing happen
no,
on her case at all. And
grandmother
our
found
local
her
news
body.
has never reported on it.
Nope, not a word. And her grandmother found her body. It was her family that was
Yep.
looking for her who found her. And it's never even been investigated.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. That case absolutely makes me ill.
Mhm.
But we will continue to do our part. But we can't solve it all. But all of you, our squad,
Mhm.
can
Yep.
certainly help by becoming aware of what's going on with the missing and murdered Indigenous cases in your community.
Mhm.
Do some searching. There are groups on Facebook now. A lot of communities have their own, and then there's a national group. There's a Canadian group. For Canada, there's one for the U.S. There are lots of groups where you can go
Mhm.
and see this information. But unless you go looking for it, you will not find it.
Mhm.
Ugh, yikes. Well, that's what we know for now.
Yep.
Katie, I know you're going to wrap us up with some DNA for the win.
Yeah. After two serial killers, it might be nice to lift things up just a little bit here with some good news.
Right?
It doesn't start as good news. This is Betty Rolf. Betty Rolf,
Mhm.
60 years old. Back in 1988, she was walking to work in a blizzard.
Oh,
Already, I hate this.
mhm,
But walking to work in a blizzard, she lived in Wisconsin
mhm.
near Appleton. And sorry, I think UPS came.
Oh,
Big alert around here.
you're probably still unloading as we speak.
Oh God, probably. I need to leave treats for the UPS driver and maybe cash. But at any rate, so Betty was walking to work and she never made it. And she had Her body was found the next day under a railroad underpass.
For those of you listening and not watching, I just watched Katie mute herself, yell at her dogs, and then come back on.
It made no difference. Sorry, you guys, about barking. Good Lord. At any rate, so when they found her body, and of course she's just, it was blizzarding. So her poor frozen, lifeless body in snow, she had been sexually assaulted, horribly beaten, and strangled. And it was such a horrific shock to her family, and they just had no leads on who did it. It was a horrible night. The weather was horrible. Nobody was out in this. It was a horrible day, but nobody was out in this, but poor Betty was walking to work.
Right.
So her case went cold pretty much immediately. They didn't have very much. And then the sheriff's office announced last week that they had made an arrest. Shocked the heck out of everybody.
Wow.
Well, they had appropriately done DNA swabs and hung on to them like so many, you know, future
Mm.
sighted medical examiners have done. And they did familial DNA and they tracked it back to two brothers, one or the other.
Mhm.
And the other brother, they announced, or they had come to first, and he fully cooperated with them. And also, it couldn't have possibly been him. The timeline didn't work, that it was him at all. But
Mhm.
he sent them straight to his brother. And so they kept an eye on the brother the way they often do in these cases and were
Mhm.
able to get some DNA off of the truck handle, the handle of his pickup truck, and
Oh.
run that. And it was an absolute match to whoever killed Betty.
Wow.
So he's alive and he's arrested, which
What?
I know
Right.
in these cases, so often the perpetrator is already dead. In fact, her family members said they're amazed because they figured that the person who did this was probably dead and gone by now.
Right?
But
Wow.
considering poor Betty was 60, he was in his early 30s.
Oh, wow.
A man in his early 30s overpowered a 60-year-old woman, sexually assaulted her, beat the hell out of her, and strangled her, and left her in a snowbank to die, and then just moved to Washington. So he lived in Wisconsin. This
Well,
happened in
that is the
Wisconsin.
definition of a psychopath right there.
Yep. Moved to Washington, where he has just been living happily ever after, ever since.
But
Yeah.
has he? I mean, are there other victims?
Oh, I doubt it. His name is Gene Meyer. I managed to find a Facebook profile for him, but there wasn't much on there. It said has been in a relationship. He was marked in a relationship in 2018. That's about all I could find. But I'm going to show you his face again. Right here, Gene Meyer. Smiling in his mugshot.
Wow.
A little weird there, Gene.
That's pretty creepy, dude.
It's hard for me to imagine that this was his only victim.
Right.
In fact, I can't really imagine that at all
No.
because he got away with it.
Right.
So why wouldn't he keep going? So who knows? Now that his DNA is in the system, I'm curious to see if that turns over any other stones. I would kind of suspect that it will. So her granddaughter Sue spoke to the press and said that the family is in shock. She said, "We didn't know if this person was deceased or if this person had other crimes. We just didn't know anything.
Mhm.
But now they do." So there you have it. DNA for the win.
Very much so. Well, that does my heart good,
Yeah.
that at least at this point he's finally off the street. But
Yeah.
it does worry me that they'll find that he's has other victims as well. But for her family, at least this gives them a little justice,
Yep.
maybe. That's what we always hope for. Is
Absolutely.
a little justice for the family, for the victim, you know, a little understanding about what happened and who, the
Yeah.
not knowing. Whenever you talk to family members in situations like this, they will always tell you that the worst thing is not knowing. If
Yeah.
they could just know. We always want to know the big things. Why?
Yeah.
We don't always get to know why, but at least we can know who.
Mhm.
And if there is at least some consequence for what they've done, it does help.
It does help. Absolutely. It also, in family units like this, crimes like this a lot of times bring out some distrust of each other.
Right.
And, besides the fact that someone has been murdered in their family, then the distrust of each other a lot of times just continues to deteriorate the family unit. It, it
Hmm.
it's horrible to not know.
Well, and distrust of your community. You now live in this community
Yeah.
where there's someone that would do this to one of your family members, and
Hmm.
you don't know who they are. I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Every face in the crowd, you're like, is it him? Is it him?
Yeah.
So at least, hopefully, this brings a little bit of peace to her family.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that. This is
Yeah.
our Monday episode, so we will be back on Tuesday and Wednesday with
Uh
our
huh.
usual format, and then we'll be back Wednesday night for our live case updates live stream on Facebook and YouTube. That's at 7 p.m. Mountain. So, as always, we appreciate it if you like, subscribe, share, and comment.
Hmm.
Also, check us out over on Patreon. We do extra content for our patrons every month,
Hmm.
and
Oh, and
we
we have a
appreciate.
barn burner of a Patreon coming.
That's what
Sometimes
I
we use
hear.
Patreon as a place where we put cases that are too hardcore, we think, to put on YouTube
Yeah.
because we don't want to get kicked off YouTube. And so sometimes those more hardcore cases will go on Patreon because that's where they're
Hmm.
safest. And ooh,
Yeah.
we're putting
Well,
one
and
up
then you
there
can
this
make a
week that
decision about whether
holy
you want to
hell.
watch it or not.
For sure. Yep.
So we'll have a new one this week, and it sounds like it's a pretty wild one. So check out that. It's a
Hard
nominal
yikes.
fee, and for that, you get some extra content from us every month. And it just
Hmm.
helps to support us and help us to be able to continue to do the work that we love doing.
Hmm.
So, you know it. We are the True Crime Squad. Thanks for being here.
Take care.